All right, so we're here with Dana Shaw, Youth Ambassador History. So we just wanted you to kind of start with your personal story, you and Dennis's story about where it started with Youth Ambassadors, kind of the moment that you remember how it started and just how it developed from there.
Well, he's not here, and unfortunately I can't really speak for him because a lot of this was evolving here at the Partners, and after he left Brasilia, he was the cultural affairs officer there and knew the country and the people he worked with in the embassy. The locals we had been together for over 2 years. So when he came back, I think it was an idea from the ambassador at the time, Donna. I've got her one of the guides here. Her pictures in the Youth Ambassador booklet that they would produce for each group. And it had, this is the lady, that it was right at the time, 2002, just after the 9/11, and before, about a year before the Iraq War. And I think that they were looking for, I'm not sure about where the seed for this came, except that Karen Dance is here. She's a former cultural affairs officer that has been involved at the time we were, although there were two previous cultural affairs officers that were working with this ambassador, and that started with them. So they wanted to do a program where they could bring youth up here, and they thought to find the young people that didn't have the opportunities that most Brazilians did, who had any kind of connections and were able to send their children to university in Brazil, because there weren't enough places in the university. So they knew that a lot of young people were out there but didn't have any opportunity. So they looked for this kind of way to find these kids, and against a lot of people's ideas. We had never spent money. State Department typically didn't do things for kids.
Yeah.
In secondary school, you know that. They sent more professionals and upper level exchanges. But Dennis, having been a teacher himself for 12 years in the high schools, and a principal, and a coach, and a drama, he taught everything, English. And so he knew the high school situation. And in our past, he had worked, for example, in Portugal with secondary school teachers. And that was when Portugal was just becoming democratic. And he had a program in the country of Portugal for secondary school teachers, and nobody paid any attention to them before. And they didn't know enough about America, even in Portugal, because they had been
70s.
closed. Right.
Yeah.
No, this was actually in the 80s,
Okay.
late 80s. This was after we were in Brazil.
Oh, after
Rio.
Brazil.
We were in Brazil from Rio from 80 to 85. So that was the time when the country changed from the military government to the democracy.
Sure.
In that 5 years. And then we went to Portugal for 4 years. And in the 90s, we went back to Brasilia. And that's when the democratic government in Brasilia was flourishing. However, they had the impeachment of Collor at the time, which was a big brouhaha. But Henrique Cardoso became the president, and he was one that everybody in Latin America and outside of Latin America admired and respected. So the Brazilian government was becoming much more, what all of us were hoping for, more open and democratic. So this was sort of a thing that I think just kind of evolved. It was the timing that was right for it. And Dennis being interested in those things, we always were exchanging teachers. We had youth exchange even through the DC Partners with Brasilia, changing high school kids back and forth. But that was a little bit that was a small scale thing. but it was the idea was to try, was what they listed in the booklet.
That was
kinds
before
of
Ambassadors
kids?
of Hope. That was
No,
another separate
Ambassadors
program.
Hope was a separate program with 2 chapters. And in Partners, it was historical that we've had youth exchanges between Indiana and Rio Grande do Sul. There's been one for many years. Those students are picked and go for like 3 months. And they're small, they're smaller numbers, but it's been going for a long time. So Partners wasn't new to the idea of exchanging kids back and forth. But how it actually started, where the exact seed was, I think there are some people out there that could tell you maybe a little more about the very beginning. But in Brasilia, the embassy, they conceived this program. And then they knew Dennis already was here because he had come from the embassy, and asked him through Partners if we could manage it on this side. And he, was interested in it.
Who asked Partners? The embassy or Dennis?
The embassy.
Okay.
Yeah, and knowing Dennis was here, who knew Brazil, who spoke Portuguese, and we knew the country, and he knew the binational center system. All of them, was set up by the Americans way back.
Right.
And of course, Partners is an old organization from the time of Kennedy, the Alliance for Progress. So the idea, the concept actually originated in Brasilia. And 2 years later, after the program had gone for like 3 years, I think, we went down to Brazil, and they celebrated. They had an evaluation. Every year we had an evaluation. About 3 months later, and it took place in the country to make the program better the next year. Well, that year we went, and that was really quite a sort of a turning point where it really became, we could see that it had really paid off, so to speak, because it had been going for 3 years. But the first group that came, there were only 12 kids. 12 kids were picked. But there was a competition countrywide. I don't remember how many applied.
And this was 2002?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
2002. It's 10 years this year when it starts. It takes a whole year for the program to get going.
Okay.
So 2002 was the selection through the embassy down in Brazil. Nothing took place here. But they already knew, they knew that we were committed here with the Partners chapters all over the country because we already had the network. We had a network of volunteers, and that meant that we wouldn't need the costs to be prohibitive. For example, we need airline tickets, but all the families would host. They'd be volunteers. We were not paying people to do this.
Yeah.
In other words, and Dennis volunteered time outside the office, when we saw that they were going to come in January, we couldn't believe it, January, But that's when their schools are on break. We had to give in to that. The South that's their summer. And January, you wouldn't think that would work. But and it was hard for me too. To think we just had to commit that month of January. We couldn't go away in the winter, But still, when those kids were picked, then the selection process you have to look into because it's amazing. Because now I saw 2 years later they had 20 kids come and there were 1,100 that applied. So to only pick 20 out of 1,100.
That was in the second year?
That was the second, 2 years later. In one of the books it'll say 5, I believe it was, yeah. And I know it's way more than that now for the Brazil program.
3,000 to 4,000
because there's so
applicants.
many kids out there.
Yeah.
It's a young country, first of all. When we went there, we heard, half the country's under 19 or something like that.
Yeah.
The statistics are there. But anyway, the selection is a big thing, and it took place in all of these centers around the country. Well, they had to also work with those centers. They knew that we would have the ideas here on what to do. Develop the program here, of course, for these kids for how many days? The first week, 6 days. It kind of went between 7 and 5 and played around with timing. What would you do while you're here? And then go out to the different states. Brazil chapters only. That was at that time, of course, Nebraska, you know, and the different states, Montana.
They went to Montana?
Yes.
Montana's partnered with Argentina.
Actually, it is, but some of the kids, I don't know. No, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting that. Because afterward, later on, the kids got scholarships to go to U.S. schools, and some went to Montana.
Okay.
That's what happened.
Okay.
But that's what happened afterward.
Yeah.
It just started the ball rolling, so to speak, for these kids. Because once they sicked them up, and they were here for 6 days, that was a time they could bond. And with only 12, it was pretty easy. We had a handful of volunteers that helped with everything. The cars, the cell phones were just becoming popular. That helped a lot. And we set up the programs with the museums or whatever they were going to see.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just museums. It wasn't entertainment. We wanted to be sure they understood our educational system. Always visited the Department of Education. And Dennis knew people there. The consular officers or former people from Brazil, he knew in State Department. So we could, he could decide which offices to visit. I remember there's a list somewhere in here that says we always went to these 3 departments. So your State Department officers are important in this whole thing because they're giving the money, and you have to work with them on all the details too.
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, I'm going on too far ahead, perhaps, but at the beginning, then the 5 criteria of picking these kids was unique in that they were of, and you know what they are. I'm not going to mention it. Take your time now, but they're all listed here in paperwork.
Is it the same as it is today?
I think
the
it
high
is.
school, 15 to 18 are high school.
Right.
Demonstrate leadership capacity, good academic level, volunteer service or commitment in their
Yes.
community, and then English ability. So
And-
intermediate
and-
language.
Family,
Family.
disadvantaged background.
And underprivileged.
Underprivileged, in a way underprivileged, or
Yeah.
we might say lower income, in that they
Wouldn't
don't
have
have the means
Yeah.
to possibly go to private school, which would better their educational level. Public schools in the past have not been as well thought of in Brazil, but they're improving all the time. And these kids learned English on their own. So many of them. I met a couple of kids from Tocantins in the middle of nowhere, and they only learned by books or TV.
Yeah.
And they studied, and they were fluent. These kids were fluent. It was just incredible. So that kind of talent to pull out of, it was really encouraging to see these kids. And then when they got together here, it was just like they bonded. It was easy to bond 12
Now,
kids.
the 12 kids came from any part of the country.
Yeah, different states.
All different states?
Yes. It was set up as many states as we could commit. Or say some binational centers were better than others or more active than others, and they were strong. For example, Sao Paulo, definitely. Rio, Recife, mostly the bigger cities at the beginning. Now it's branched out into the interior. Acre, Rondônia. I met kids a couple weeks ago from, the states where the Amazon is.
Yeah.
Pará. There wasn't somebody from those places because there wasn't the infrastructure there to get them here. So they had to rely on more than just even binational centers. Sometimes the state, when we went down there, there was a whole list of people they brought into Brasilia at the beginning. All these officials from different states in the state, the Department of Education of Brazil, Department of Education officials, or binational center leaders. I've got a list of names here. I can find it for you, just to give you an idea. In 2005, when we went to, they launched the new year there. In the next year, they announced it in Brasilia, so it got good press coverage and everything. And that way, all these other people from around the country came, and they were introduced, and they met the ambassador, and it was really good PR for our State Department at a time when our political, the political environment was very bad because of the Iraq War. So it was quite encouraging to work on something that was so positive, you know, in the long run. But the network that was set up, that's what I really want to emphasize. It was just absolutely, it just grew because word of mouth spreads. When a young kid goes back to his little town and the mayor gives him the key because he went to the U.S. for 2 weeks, you know, the key to honor him, or little things happen like that. And I have stories in the paperwork of when so-and-so went back to his hometown, and also in the U.S. when he went out to some little town in West Virginia, what happened to him.
Yeah.
And how here's this Brazilian kid, and you would think it might be better to send them to the big cities, you know, our cultural capitals.
Yeah.
But we think that it's also good for Americans to be exposed in the interior, in these places. They have a hunger to know about the world, and they're very hospitable, and it's authentic. That's the word that I think is best describes their experience when they go to these small towns and are hosted not by people who are paid to do it, but who are partners, volunteers. Those people really care about how they think about us, and they're interested too. They will give them a good experience. So it's very authentic. I mean, you couldn't do it through a tourist tour, even a special tour with a tour agency. It wouldn't be quite the same way.
Right. No, you're interacting
If you know
with
what I
real
mean.
people.
Real people, yeah.
Yeah.
And the mother works, and the kids, and usually the kids that the families they went with had kids, so they could go with them to their school, you know, and then they'd realize all these people think that we speak Spanish. They were shocked, you know. So they bring their maps and they tapes, and they had all these little gifts, these cute little gifts from their country or hometown, and handed them out, and they were made to feel so unique. And they gave talks about Brazil. They educated the people. So it just...
They were ambassadors.
That's right. It's truly, you are youth ambassadors. In the booklet, this ambassador, Hernick, that was there 2 years later when we went, I think. No, she'd gone by that time. But she emphasized how, to them, she would talk to those kids before they left. They always had the orientation before they left, and that prepared them. And then there's a lot of in the evaluation papers of each year. It came out clear what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought they could do better. So every year it tended to get better. I mean, you tried to improve the program. I'm sure you know that now with the Spanish kids.
Well, with your I mean the different ways that we implement the program here in DC, and then in the host communities, and just we've seen over the past 4 years at least that I've been here.
And I think the experience helps a lot. They come in the middle of the winter, and we knew that their clothing wouldn't be. Some of them borrowed clothes. Some of them would come in, you know, with a coat that looked. One of the tall guys had a coat that could have looked like what a woman might wear. I mean, they had to borrow coats. But when we got here, we went out and scrounged at secondhand places, and people donated coats. I had 6 boxes. I had about 40 coats that they could pick through. And then we realized that wasn't enough. They need socks, so we got warm socks. Some of them don't even wear socks, where they come from. And then they come with these real thin tennis shoes. And so we couldn't buy boots, but we almost scheduled, when the group wasn't quite so big, we would schedule a stop at a shoe store down here, and they could pick up boots because there was snow when they were coming. And then I probably went to 3 or 4 Target stores out in the suburbs to get underwear of all sizes. And then we would set up a little room as they came in and fit everybody for coats, gloves, hats, underwear,
That's
and
something.
socks. And you don't even think about that until you get involved. You realize they've got to be warm.
Yeah.
So that was more what got thrown back on me, the logistics, right?
Wow.
Right.
Staying warm.
Yeah.
What states did they go to the first few years for their host community?
Well, we have 19 chapters with Brazil, right? 19 chapters.
I don't know the exact number.
Okay,
but
I
I'll
don't
take
know.
your word
Well,
for
it was
Something like that.
19 chapters with Brazil. There's about 60, so a third of our chapters are with Brazil, roughly. And so, for example, right around here, we have Tennessee with the Amazon.
Mhm.
So when those kids, from all of these kids came, I'm trying to think, for example, if they were from the Amazon and they came here for their first few days, then they went to Tennessee because Tennessee was a partner. And that may give them an opportunity later to work with to become a partners member in the Amazon.
Right, but because there were different youth from all different departments, like how were they
You mean-
split up to go to their host communities?
It depended on where they came from.
So like one would go to one state.
Well,
another one
usually
would go
there
to
were
another state,
there might be
or
two from Para,
Yeah.
and Belém was with who's Belém? Not Georgia. Pernambuco was with Georgia. So anybody from
That's not
Pernambuco would go
Colorado?
to Georgia. Colorado,
right.
right?
Colorado.
Colorado, yes.
So then they would, a group of 12 youth that come through first to DC, then disperse in
Yes.
the smaller groups of
Yes.
one or two.
One or two.
Per state.
And they couldn't go alone, so we had to have chaperones because they were under 18.
Yeah.
So the first, I can't remember the first year, but it was only 12, so that wasn't so hard.
Who did you send to fly out to the different states with them?
Well, we did have counselors or chaperones, but I'm trying to think that first year.
Colin Powell.
That was the thrill, is that they got, Colin Powell had them come to, here's the pictures from
This is from 2003?
3, yeah, the first year. They're at up at State, and they gave them gifts. There's a little thing from CP.
Who gave these photos?
I'm sure you have
Yeah.
these photos, but this is the second copy. This is the whole group. This does not include the chaperones. This is just the 12 kids. We didn't need, the first year, I'm just trying to think, arranging to get them on the planes, how that worked, and I could find out for you later. Here is the list, though. Oh, we did have Sylvia from Belém. I remember her now. We had her come, and then she would accompany some kids, like when they needed an adult with them. But I think that the logistics of those flights out, that was always a trick to get them on different flights the same day.
Yeah. And it still is.
You know, it sure is. And I remember leaving them the 2005 year, maybe it was. We finished. Washington D.C. was under such a hassle at that winter. I don't remember what caused it, but we decided to wind up the program in Chicago in January.
That was better?
It was. Well, believe it or not, we weren't far from the airport, which helped. We had the evaluation there and everything, and we stayed there. But there was a blizzard when we arrived, and we were in a bus touring downtown Chicago when the streets were empty. It was hilarious. We got outside, the snow was flying everywhere. They just loved it, you know. And it really was you could go around Chicago in a blizzard because they keep their
They know
streets
how to do
plowed.
that.
Yeah.
And we could go anywhere. We had the run of the city, so to speak. And we had a wonderful family have the kids over in front of their fire. I think there was 20 kids that year. We never had, I never had more than 25. I think we went up to 30 the last year. It went from 12 to 20 to 25 to 30 or 35. And now, like this year was 45, but it was only because it was the 10th year, and they pushed it to that, but we really we had nothing to do with it because World Learning has the contract now
Right.
for the last 3 years. And then the Brazil Southern Cone,
2007.
that's a whole other thing. And I've seen paperwork in here when it spread out to Brazil Southern Cone after we didn't have the program. Dennis still kept in touch with the World Learning people because we knew a lot of the kids, or we wanted to keep in touch with the network and draw them into the networks that we had established with the Alumni Association, the email lists, once you have this network. And it was important for those kids to keep their contact with each other because it was supportive in so many ways. And one of the big things that happened was that after that, these college programs, through people and Fulbright in Brazil who came here and facilitated all this, that's the work that takes place behind the scenes. They visited colleges all over the U.S. and looked for scholarships. And they want to diversify for their some of the colleges that don't usually have that kind of money. They would do it. And so they sent them to places all over the U.S. They would offer them scholarships. Of course, they don't have the money to even get the tickets yet. Or some of we had to ask, they had to find airlines to get tickets. And there's a lot of that kind of work that goes on. But to continue that thing, it was just sort of evolved from all that. And that didn't have anything to do with partners, except partners chapters did get involved in helping these kids to get where they needed to go, or they became members sometimes. I don't know where that lies right now. I don't know how involved they are in partners. For example, Dennis's scholarships is based on their being a member of a partners chapter and have already had a trip to the U.S. In other words, been a youth ambassador. So maybe you know more about that.
About the involvement of the Brazil counterparts, or just any chapter?
Well, any chapter.
Yeah, well, what we try to do with the YA program is, depending on what country they come from, if their counterpart state is strong, then they do get sent to their counterpart state typically.
Right.
So there is a...
It depends on the local
It depends.
chapter.
I mean, we
Right.
do maintain some of the traditional partnerships and youth that go to their counterpart state, but in a lot of cases we've branched out, and states maybe don't have the capacity or the strength to host the youth, and so they'll go to other states. Like Ecuador has gone to Wyoming.
Oh,
And Wyoming
okay.
is traditionally a Brazil counterpart for Goiás.
Goiás, yeah.
But we've sent
Goiás.
Argentinians to Tennessee, too.
Okay.
We're going to be sending Caribbean youth now to non-traditional counterpart states as well.
But is it your Tennessee chapter then that is helping with the Argentinians that went there?
Tennessee hosted the Argentines once, the whole group of Argentines.
okay.
And then, because of the different iterations of the program, last year State Department, they asked us to integrate the youth in their host communities. And this was the first time that we actually separated country groups, because they would always stay really as a country group and go to their counterpart chapter or just
True,
stay within
true.
their country groups,
Yeah.
even if they were split up within the country group, like we've done with Bolivia, for example, where we split up the group. And one would go to Arkansas, one would go to Utah, one group would go to
You
North
mean
Carolina.
the country groups were split up to go to different states?
The country groups usually stay together.
Oh,
Bolivia was a rare case, Bolivia and Colombia, because of the multiple chapters that exist in those countries.
that's right.
But last year what State Department asked us to do was to split up the country groups and integrate them. So we sent Uruguayans, Argentinians, and Venezuelans together, for example, to one state.
I see.
And then Paraguayans
More
and
for-
Uruguayans were together in another state.
Right, you've
But
got
that
a more
only happened
multinational.
once.
See, the Brazil program is a national program. It's big
Right.
enough to handle its own. They
Yeah.
mix all the different states. It's big enough. It's
Yeah.
the landmass of Brazil is as big as west of the Mississippi. I'm sorry, only the
lower
Amazon.
48, yeah.
Only the Amazon is that big. I saw a film about the Amazon the other day. I have to tell you about.
All of Brazil is slightly bigger than the 48 state.
Oh, well, I have to remember. I think so. Yeah.
I've heard that a bunch.
Yeah, so you know, you're talking about a huge country here, and and the regions of Brazil are so varied also, just
Yeah,
as we
exactly.
are. But that's interesting that they're mixing the countries there, which is a good idea. They all speak Spanish, and you have more things that can happen afterward with those groups
Well,
because they
yeah.
mix, maybe.
I mean,
You're
like I
more
said,
acquainted with each other.
there's been different variations, and so now with multiple countries, an organization like Partners that has been implementing in multiple countries, 8 to 11 countries or so, can bring about 4 to 5 or 3 to 5 countries at the same time, and they'll be together in DC and get to know each other in DC.
Yeah.
And then they'll
Then-
go out to their separate host communities. So based on their country, they'll go out to their host communities, and
you
they'll
are
be separated
trying,
there.
You are trying to keep the connections, though, with the Partners chapters.
We do
with
try,
their
yeah.
sister city or
With
country.
their counterpart
Yeah.
state, yeah, we do
If
try
you
to do
can,
that.
because they here they're motivated to do that, like Wisconsin and Nicaragua,
Right.
for example, is such a strong chapter of Nicaragua.
So you said you guys did your best to keep in touch with some of these. Do you know, some fun stories or, following up with maybe ones from the first couple classes? Because they were in their late 20s now, right?
I know. Yeah, I just saw at this 10th, they brought in 6 kids from previous youth ambassador groups, to mentor these 45 kids, which was interesting to hear. They
Yeah.
brought them to mentor, including 2 Americans who have gone now to the U.S. exchange going on now with Brazil. That's new. The State Department is doing that, sending down American kids to Brazil,
yeah.
the other way. So
Yeah.
2 of these kids were in this group of 6, and we met for dinner one evening. And
This last group?
this last
Oh,
group in
okay.
January, yeah.
Okay.
They called, and I know well, one from 2003, the first year, I know him. He came and stayed, came for the evening, because he has been with us four times since he was here. He's come through, and he's now, I was going to show you his picture in this first group. He was in the original 12. And he's, we have email
You saw
lists
him
for
this
all.
time?
I saw him this time, yeah. He's come through before, though. This kid right here, Fabiano
Uh-huh.
Giacome, he ended up going to college in Montana, Rocky Mountain College. And he got here he is,
Oh my goodness.
at my house. And that was the group that we brought to our house for the party, because there was only 12, and they all roasted marshmallows. So I was going to say, is there a picture here of the group at my house? It's on the CD. There are CDs of each group, by the way, with photos, and I've got those at home. I didn't bring, but he celebrated his 10th year by roasting marshmallows, homemade marshmallows that somebody gave me at Christmas, at our fireplace. So that, to him, he's excited. He was excited. It was so funny. This is him, and he came out that night, all the way from the 4-H Center in Northwest, where the Brazil group was staying, and they called me from the metro about 9 o'clock. This kid came at 9, and they didn't leave till 1, but this kid came earlier, and he was busy with mentoring or whatever. They had their responsibilities. He is the president of the Alumni Association
Of the
now,
YAAA?
of the for the
Youth Ambassador Alumni Association?
Yeah, Brazilian. Now, I don't know, are they all together all over Latin America now or not?
No,
They're not,
the
are they?
YAAA is just Brazilian, the Youth
Okay.
Ambassador Alumni Association.
Interesting.
But now we have the International Youth Ambassador Network, which encompasses all of the Western Hemisphere.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just common sense. Here is Fabiano, too, that this was another year when he was at Rocky Mountain. He and Julio, who were in the first group. Let me show you Julio, because that's quite funny. He's still out in Billings, Montana, where he is a Marriott hotel manager. And Fabiano went out and saw him now and said that he was selling flowers from his home. He started a flower business. He's a real good PR. This kid is Julio in Portuguese. And he came from Rocky Mountain. This is Julio. I haven't seen him since. This was 2000, a couple years later.
Okay.
They were, after they went back, he got USAPI as a program where they give them scholarships to go to the U.S. And they applied. A lot of these kids applied. Some of them didn't get it. Some of them got it. And then the Fulbright people, they had to figure out a network to get them here once they got the scholarships. But Fabiano and Julio went to Rocky Mountain State. And when Christmas came, that first year of the groups, some of them were all here. Deborah was up at Smith. She got into Smith College.
Where's Smith?
Smith is in Massachusetts. Let's see. This is Glauber. He is at U of Penn. He finished University of Pennsylvania engineering. He is now in Brazil, and I think he might be working for Embraer, but he's a very good tech type. And he's gone back to the country, which is really great to hear. Simon went to University of Chicago, another tough school. Did very well. I don't know where Simon is now. I think he might still be in Chicago because I haven't heard. And this is his girlfriend. She was from the country of Georgia, and he insisted on bringing his girlfriend. So these kids came to our house that Christmas. They didn't have any. They couldn't go home. They couldn't afford to go home. They managed to get airfare or drive. They drove from Montana. These two, because of that guy who wanted to go to Florida, drove them here, dropped them off, and went to Florida.
What part of town you guys in?
We're in Falls Church.
Falls Church.
So
okay.
we said, yeah, come for Christmas. So that took care of our Christmas. And they just came and they all hung out in the basement. We have room for 4 people, but we ended up with we had 4. I can't remember that Christmas. But then that started another tradition of coming for Christmas. So then we would always go out to my son's farm, and they turned out to be our kids. Is what happened if you keep up with them long enough. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just that particular first group was small enough that we could connect. We do keep in touch with them, though. I hear from Leandro. Dennis wrote everybody. Marcella is in Recife. I hear from her. I don't hear from him. But I'm purposely going to be, in the future, trying to see. In November, Priscilla later met a Brazilian diplomat at a cocktail party in Brasilia. She went to the University of Brasilia. She is from Campinas, near Sao Paulo. She went to the University of Brasilia, but because she was one of 2 youth ambassadors in the university there, the ambassador had a reception for the Brazilian Diplomatic Corps, and his residence invited the 2 youth ambassadors. She met one of the young diplomats, and this romance flourished. Later on, we heard from her in Paris. She got married to him. She is now in Damascus, Syria, with this Brazilian. He's number 2 in the embassy, and they came through in November, called me, and I went down and had coffee with them at the art gallery. So, that story's about with me, but I'm not saying that I don't. There's a lot of stories about them too. When we went back for that 2005 beginning of the new year, they brought in from the States a lot of that group, And it was just like, they hadn't seen each other because it's a big country and they can't afford to travel. So that was really a wonderful way for them to get together. And the embassy's done a lot, little things like that, to keep the group bonded. And it's important in a big country like that. I would think in the smaller countries it might be a little easier, but still, transportation is a big cost in Latin America. That was that first group, which are we got closer to over the years. The second group too, they went up to 20 that year, I think. But what was so wonderful about this group, there were still not too many to come to our house.
This was 2004?
And we decided we'd still have the party there because they had heard about roasting marshmallows. So, once you start little tricks and things like that, the word spreads. So this group really bonded, and there were some talented kids there. Gustavo is the one that I think he works for, got something to do with the Navy. Every time we went back to Brazil, we would look up the kids if they were in the city where we were. We arranged to take them out to supper or something. So, Lais became a lawyer. She's a very sharp gal. She's interested in labor issues. She's going a long way. I got an email from her last time. She was in The Hague. So I don't know what she's doing.
The Hague?
The Hague in Belgium. She was in Europe. Juliana is a sweetheart. I don't know what's happened to her. Isabel got married. She's in Rio. We see her when we go to Isabel. Leonardo, I'm not in touch with yet, but Lisiani. Dennis would often hear from her. She's in Curitiba. Anyway, Roberta had a birthday the other day. I sent a note, and I don't know if I'll hear back. Just because I happened to notice he kept birthday lists for all the kids. We have a separate birthday sheet for youth ambassadors. For each month, there's about a dozen. So what I do now, and I only have done it twice because I just don't have time like he did. Is do a mass email, happy birthday for that month, If I'm lucky, I can do it. And I might hear back from 2 or 3. So it's fun to try to do that. That was that year. And then it got bigger. And we, gulped as they added more kids because it's harder to bond. But we were lucky here in the partnership. We've got enough volunteers in Washington that work with the DC partners that we would just ask all of them to get involved, and they loved it. They would help us for no money, They would, we had people like Marina Farias, who was very skilled with the computer, so she would be sure that we got all the lists in. Regina Prince helped. She worked she might have been an intern here for a while. I don't know about that. But she has her husband's in the State Department, and they're in Paris now. But Regina was very good. She's a former journalist and photographer from Recife. So she would really see that we got the media coverage. And we found that getting a volunteer in each skill area is very important. And then somebody, the Wintersteins are great having parties, so sometimes they'd have a social event in a home. I'm talking about, because they stayed in a hotel here, and it was very hard to get them to feel the family things. I think had I to do it over, if you really could get areas in the city to sponsor 2 or 3 kids within that little town, or that suburb, it would maybe be a way to cut the cost, because a hotel, to put them all up is considerable.
Where would you put them in the hotel?
Oh, they'd be right near here because they always had their orientation here.
Yeah.
So up the street we used, there used to be a hotel on that corner of the square north of here. What was the name of that?
Well, there's the Marriott. I think there's a Marriott. And
we don't
Homewood
use
Suites now.
No, Homewood Suites is where we went to.
Yeah, okay.
We went there the last year.
Yeah.
And we even stayed downtown. Dennis and I were trying to go back and forth every day. We just were exhausted.
Yeah.
So we stayed there, finally, the last time. But the other one, doesn't exist anymore. It was like a pretty reasonable hotel right on the square near Homewood Suites.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple right on that
Yeah.
circle, Thomas Circle.
And we always thought it was good for them to see the partner's office,
Yeah.
go to the embassy. They'd always schedule time and hopefully see the ambassador if he was in town, their own ambassador, because it means a lot for them, and it's good PR for Brazil to have. They got the infrastructure to send back news to the press and so on.
And we
That's
still do
awesome.
that.
And you do that with
We
all
still
these
do.
embassies too?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a lot
Send
of.
them to their embassies.
That's good. Yeah, I'm just having been raised and educated, an
Yeah,
educator.
yeah,
And Dennis
yeah.
was a teacher so many years. That's the first thing he thinks about. What are you going to learn from this? You know? And you know from each other that doing something is probably better than doing something together. The action is teach more than the example. In other words, of being active. They were very tired. They did complain. The evaluations will say they were just, we had to keep up with them. If we could do it, they should be able to do it.
Yeah.
A lot of those kids live in cities where they don't walk a lot. And really, it's hard here to come in the winter and walk and walk and walk. And the ice skating, We had one kid break their ankle. I remember Matt Clausen getting into a taxi and going to the hospital that night. And I pushing a wheelchair on the Capitol tour because we didn't have enough people, but I went with the guy who had to go on a different route.
That's a
Yeah.
pain.
A lot of things, and maybe that's why with 45 they didn't do it, but I do think, and the Capitol tour is different now too, it's shorter. It's only an hour.
Oh, it's much different. You
It's
can
much
go through
different.
the Capitol Visitor Center. You don't
It's-
have to go through staff members of Congress.
I know, but you know what?
And
They liked visiting
liked the staff.
congressman's office.
Well, we still do that.
Do you?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we definitely still
Yeah, that does
set
add
up those meetings.
that dimension there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one winter day, we went you know how you line up for security?
Uh-huh.
We did it 7 times in one day.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe they had to take their coats off, their shoes off, the bags go through
Yeah.
security 7 times in one day.
Yeah.
Even that would be enough to wear anybody out. So this was just it was exceptional experience because it was they have never traveled, and if you go with people that have never traveled, there's a naivety there that you have to deal with.
Right. You have
Yeah.
to orient them well.
Yeah, that's right.
Prepare
Think
them.
try to think
Manage
ahead.
expectations.
Yeah, try to think ahead of everything.
Did you all do the character counts workshops with all the youth ambassadors?
Yes, but not in a workshop sense, I don't think. In fact, every packet of youth ambassador information that I have at home has character counts in with it.
Yeah.
So it was part of the orientation, let's say,
Okay.
and the focus. And it was focused on certain chapters, focus on it more. Like we had a character counts person in Nebraska, so he made sure that it was part of their that kind of thing.
And is that something that was strengthened over the years that you all continue to do and really made that a
Well,
focus of the program?
I think it had some, presenting ethics is important to the kids. Anyway, it's a natural thing that maybe you do. I don't know if in time, what they think about it now, or there's been no, maybe the evaluations, I have a couple of them here, might show that. I don't really think, I don't know about that. But I know it was an emphasis because it was
Yeah.
always talked about, and that was kind of when
Dennis is really known
he
for
went
that.
to he went to their workshop. Josephson had these workshops all over the country, and we went down to Tennessee one week, and he went to the 3-day workshop there. Charles Carter of Tennessee. He's in the Tennessee Partners. He was
Yeah.
nearby, so we saw him
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah, he hosts the Venezuelan youth every year. They go to Johnson City,
Oh,
and
good.
Charles is the coordinator.
Because his wife is from Latin America, isn't
She's
she?
Chilean.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice that they still do that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And we have our Venezuelan
great.
youth coming at the end of March.
Really?
We'll send you an
Okay.
email. And join
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel I have a Spanish folder at home with the Spanish groups in it because he kept pictures of them and names, and I don't know if he met any of them. I think he did meet some of them, didn't he? Do you remember? Not since you were here, probably with Melissa.
That who met
The
them?
Spanish groups, Dennis.
Dennis?
I don't know. I
He
think
did.
he tried to
Since I've
meet
been
them
here,
when they
he
came in.
Yeah,
He
no.
made sure he met them.
The first couple of years that I was here, he was still involved. I mean, not as
Yeah.
much, but I remember my first trip to the airport to welcome Paraguayan and Uruguayan youth ambassadors, and Dennis was there. It was super early in the morning.
Good.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to get in touch with some of the past.
It'd be nice to talk to some of them. Mayara, I talked to on Skype. She's in Boston.
Yeah.
She's a good one. She graduated from Mount Holyoke last year, and she came to D.C. and with her family. So I put them up because so they had a place while they were here. Because
Yeah.
that was part of her. They had never been in the U.S. and then they went to New York and then back. She went back to Boston and they went back to Brazil. But that was kind of a typical Brazilian experience when her family came in, and she was so excited. Mount Holyoke was a wonderful experience for her. You could watch the graduation on YouTube or whatever. She sent me the link,
Yeah.
and that was wonderful to hear the talks and hear what she went through.
Sure.
She sent pictures. They all send pictures all the time. There's one sheet here of all the YouTube pictures of one particular year's group and where they went. Pictures in the snow, that kind of thing. Because the snow was a big deal.
I can imagine, yeah.
Oh, I think this is it. In fact, one of them. Or through Yahoo, I guess. Regina is the Brazilian who married the American who's
That's in
in the
Damascus?
foreign. She's in Paris.
Okay.
She has 4 kids. I mean, she had
Wow.
4 boys, and she has a family and a job and would help with youth ambassadors. So she worked very hard. And these are a lot of her photos. And I probably have these on a CD because this is the only printout I have of photos. That would show you a few things.
Okay.
But it doesn't give you, facts or information that I don't know that you'd be looking for. And of course, the partners newsletter before always had this. You've got these old ones on file somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know where they are, but we
Well,
do
I have
them.
one.
Barbara and Carmen have done a great job.
I have 2 years of them here. I have this one too, where
Yeah.
Colin Powell met. So that was on the front page of this one for 2003. And that also has Farmer to Farmer, right on the front page there. And all of them had, we had our master schedules.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then the lists of the volunteers were usually in here too. And the exact schedule.
Yeah.
And in Brazil, they had an exact schedule for when they were there. And then we tried to advise, they tried to advise, I didn't do any of that, the chapters to let them know what we were doing as kind of a model, so that if they went to Lincoln, Nebraska, they would know that, meet the mayor of the city, go to the local museum.
The embassy would do that? you
No,
mean?
no.
Who's
We
they?
here, partners.
Yeah.
When we had these schedules and when we set it up with the different chapters, there was an effort, I think, to help them to know what we want them.
To create the agenda.
We
in their
want
state.
them to really feel what this country's all about, and not sit and watch TV for 4 days.
Right.
You know.
Right.
I mean, not that you would say that, but
Yeah.
we would hope that they would be have a stimulating program.
You were the liaisons between the embassy, the states.
Well, the partners here is always been a liaison with different chapters. I don't know who's in charge of the Brazil chapters. I think it's Barbara now.
Well,
And-
we don't have
and
the same
state-
system
See,
where
you used to
the
have
points
people.
of contact, right?
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore.
I think they're missing that because that email contact back and forth is personal, more personal maybe.
Right.
I'm sure you do it in a different way.
It varies from programs because based
Yeah.
on the different programs that we have now, we have different levels of contact with the different chapters.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, these are just black and whites of the first year.
Okay.
So it's a very small group. But we always
Well,
visited a local high school
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
and paired them up with kids for the day, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they can see their own counterparts in this country really made. One of them, I still hear from Sam Sandifer, who was at Woodward Wilson at the time. He's now in his 20s, and he's in Spain. But every time he's here, if he's here on vacation and there's a group in town, he will make an effort and come over and visit with them.
He was
So
a peer that went to that high
he
school.
was one of these kids, American kids here.
Okay.
Yeah, and he speaks Portuguese and Spanish himself. But he's already graduated, I think. He's already graduated from the University of Wisconsin. But he might be just on a semester abroad. I'm not sure.
All right. Well,
So it's a network.
yeah.
All right, well,
Okay.
nice visiting
This is
with
good
you.
information, Dana. Thank you so much for
I don't know.
starting
I hope so.
to
It's
share your
not-
story because
it's
there's
not-
more. I know.
Yeah, and I haven't even run into the little. I have a whole stack of emails from kids that I just kept separate, and of course, personal correspondence that they would write, and maybe in there I can glean some little testimonials, if that's what you're thinking,
Yeah.
or little stories.
That would be very interesting.
I'll try to see what I can find. It's going to take some time, though.
That would be excellent. Well, yeah, no, absolutely take your time as much as you need. But yeah, that would be wonderful for us to get our hands on.
Okay. You have any other more questions, Greg?
No, that was great. Thanks for taking the time to come all the way in and see us.